Backcountry-hike-turns-terrifying. I've never posted to Reddit before. This is my first time. My brother suggested I tell my story here. I am a 33-year-old white female from Los Angeles. 3 years ago my boyfriend and I, as planned for 5 years, turned 30, sold everything we owned, including my car, took his Trailblazer and decided to just travel around the States and Canada. I guess you could call us backpackers, as we tend to chase good weather, find a state park and backcountry hike into the wilderness for days at a time. My brother likes to joke that we are anti-establishment hippies. We don't necessarily live off the grid, but between the two of us we have one prepaid phone, we use for emergencies or checking in with family and friends, and one MacBook which I use for work. I'm a freelance writer/content creator and I am on retainer with robotics company. I mostly write boring white papers or web content. The whole point of our living situation is to live debt-free and have as few bills as possible. I only use free Wi-Fi, so 1 to 2 times a week we have to go to a city with a Starbucks. This background info is only important so you know more about who we are and how simply we live. Neither of us is involved in social media, and know very little of Reddit or Instagram or use any apps, because our phone isn't a smartphone, we don't even text. Last summer we decided to do some backcountry hiking in Arkansas. It's one of those states you don't ever really hear about other hikers visiting, but we read that it had some beautiful natural landscape. It does. The rules at this particular park were pretty lax. We didn't need a permit, there were a few basic laws/guidelines, but there was no check-in needed. We had all the basics and had planned to do a 6-day hike, 3 in, 3 out. The whole time we were out there we didn't see or hear another soul, but on day 1, we were prepping to move off trail and find a camping spot as it was getting near dusk. Half-mile off trail is usually the standard for us. We took what looked like kind of an animal trail and about half a mile out we saw a green, 2-person tent. It was almost camouflaged in the foliage so we came on it almost by accident. Some backpackers prefer privacy, others are more social. We're the more social type. We've had some great experiences camping near other backpackers, sharing stories, food and a joint or two. We were around 30 yards away from the tent, it was zip closed, so my boyfriend shouted a greeting to make our presence known. No movement and no sound. We assumed green tent guy either wasn't around or didn't want to be bothered so we started off in a new direction to get some distance between us. We camped. Never heard a peep. We moved along the next morning, completely forgetting about green tent guy, until nearing the end of day 5 on our trek back. We were again looking for a spot to camp off the trail when we came up on the green tent again. This isn't that unusual, but normally backcountry hikers keep moving, so we really weren't expecting it. The tent flap was open, so my boyfriend yells his greeting again and nothing. My boyfriend wants to go check it out saying, "It's weird, and maybe someone is hurt." I didn't like the idea from the get-go, because even though we hadn't had any bad experiences personally, we'd heard enough stories from other backpackers about hermits and mountain men that want privacy, carry guns, etc. But my boyfriend assured me we'd be fine and if all else fails, offer him some weed to keep the peace and we'd go on our way. As soon as we get within 20 yards of the place, the smell of decomposition is intense. My boyfriend has been hailing his greeting over the last 20 yards and once the smell hits him, he stops and turns to me and says, "What if we find a dead body?" My skin crawled. I was immediately afraid. I've never seen a dead body before and don't want to. The closer we got to the tent, the worse the smell got. I knew for sure we were going to walk in and see some old camper's rotting corpse. What we found was worse than that. Outside the tent was a dead doe's legs, all 4 of them, covered in flies. It looked like the legs had been cut most of the way and then ripped off the rest of the way. It was a mess. Inside was the body and head of the deer, but the middle portion was swaddled in a blue fleece blanket that was blood-soaked at the bottom where the legs used to be. It was laying on its side, bottom facing the tent entry. The tail had been cut off, and the anus/vagina was covered in dried blood and a gape. Like something had been penetrating it. The same with its mouth. The bottom portion was bent down at a scary broken-looking angle. The tent was open, so we could see everything without having to go inside. Not that we would have anyway, because at this point the smell was almost debilitating. There was a dirty, almost empty clear bottle of Jergens baby oil and a stained green and white fringed kitchen towel. That was it. I immediately started crying and begged him to go. All he could muster was, "What the fuck?" And we turned and ran. We ran to the trail and jogged down it for as far as we could go until dusk was fully on us and we had to set up camp. We didn't go very far off the trail and neither of us slept. We didn't start a fire or use headlamps after full dark. We just sat up whispering to each other, going over and over what we had just seen. Every little noise startled us. It was like our brains were on red alert. I kept thinking any moment a dead deer rapist would come back to his tent, see our footprints or something, know we were there and track us back to our tent. I've never been so scared in my entire life. Just before dawn we tore down and started out. My boyfriend stopped at the ranger station on our way out of the park to report what we had seen. The ranger was a young guy around our age and he looked as freaked out by our story as we were telling it. He wrote most of it down and my boyfriend showed him on a map approximately where it had been. He asked if we knew how the deer was killed, and at that point we hadn't even thought about it. We just assumed it had been shot, but because of the blanket we didn't see a wound, but we weren't exactly giving it an autopsy either. We have since shortened our backcountry hikes to a maximum of 4 days. We've also been a lot less eager to call out to other campsites, and have never approached another unmanned tent again.